My daughter called me on a Thursday evening in March. I was in the middle of reviewing a zoning variance application, reading glasses on, highlighter in hand, the kind of quiet work I've done every Thursday evening for 30 years. I let it go to voicemail. I told myself I'd call her back after I finished the page. By the time I did, she'd driven herself home from the restaurant, sat in her driveway for 20 minutes before she could walk inside. And when she finally answered me, she said the words that daughters aren't supposed to have to say to their fathers. "It's nothing, Dad. Don't worry about it." It was not nothing. And I was done, at 63 years old, pretending that things were nothing when every bone in my body told me otherwise. Welcome to the channel. If you're joining from somewhere new tonight, drop your city in the comments. I genuinely like knowing where these stories land. And if you've ever watched someone you love absorb punishment they didn't deserve while the room stayed quiet, stay with me, because this one's for you. My daughter's name is Renata. She's 31. Before I tell you what was done to her, I need you to understand the kind of person she is, because it matters more than anything else in this story. Renata was the kind of child who noticed things other people walked past. When she was 12, she found out that the woman, 2 houses down from us, a retired school teacher named Mrs. Calloway, had stopped leaving her house after her husband passed. Renata started leaving a container of soup on her porch every Sunday. She never rang the bell. She never told me. I found out about it the day Mrs. Calloway stopped me on the sidewalk with tears in her eyes and said my daughter had kept her going through that first winter. Renata was already in high school by then. She'd been doing it for 2 years without a word. That's who she is. Quiet about the good things. Quieter still about the hard ones. Renata got married 3 years ago. Her husband's name is Derek. He's a good man, earnest, the kind who tries harder than he needs to and apologizes when he's right just to keep the peace. His mother is a woman named Sylvia Hargrove. Sylvia owns a wedding and event planning business in Scottsdale, Arizona, called Hargrove Occasions. She has been in the industry for 18 years, has a waiting list, and carries herself the way people do when they've been told they're exceptional for so long they've stopped questioning it. Sylvia brought Renata into the business 14 months into the marriage. She framed it as generosity. What it actually was, and what became clear to everyone except Derek, who loved his mother too much to see it clearly, was that Sylvia wanted someone capable and hard-working close enough to use and far enough from the title to never threaten her position. Renata handled client communications, vendor negotiations, day of logistics. Sylvia took the meetings, took the credit, and took the keynote at the regional industry conference 2 years running, while Renata built the decks she presented. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years as a structural engineer before I moved into consulting, and I now run a small firm out of Tucson called Elmore Structural Group. My name is Warren Elmore. My father started in this business pouring concrete footings on construction sites, and I watched him earn every credential he had with his hands before I earned mine with mine. I know what it looks like when a foundation is sound and when it's been built on ground that won't hold. I know it in buildings and, as it turned out, I know it in people. My flaw, if I'm honest with you the way I try to be honest with myself, is that for 2 of those 3 years I told myself that Renata's situation at Hargrove Occasions was hers to navigate. I told myself I was respecting her autonomy. I told myself she was a grown woman who didn't need her father reaching into her professional life. The truth, the part I'm not proud of, is that I didn't want to be the kind of father-in-law who creates problems in a young couple's marriage. So I bit down on what I saw, and I smiled at Sunday dinners, and I watched Sylvia Hargrove dismiss my daughter's ideas in front of clients and call it mentorship. That ended on a Thursday in March. The dinner was at a restaurant called Arcadia Table, one of those places in Scottsdale with a wine list longer than the food menu, the kind Sylvia chose because she liked environments where her authority felt natural. It was a working dinner, ostensibly, to celebrate landing a large corporate account, a 3-year contract with a hospitality group that would be the biggest in the company's history. What Renata told me later, and what I confirmed from a source I'll tell you about in a moment, was that Renata had spent 11 weeks cultivating that account. The initial contact was a referral she'd made through a former client of her own. The proposal was written almost entirely by her. The final presentation, the one that closed the deal, had been prepared by Renata over a weekend when Sylvia was in Sedona. At dinner, in front of the hospitality group's event director, a woman named Paulette, who had become genuinely fond of Renata through the negotiation process, Sylvia described the account acquisition entirely in first person. Every "I reached out," every "I designed the proposal," every "my vision for the partnership." Renata sat across the table and said nothing, the way she'd been trained by 3 years of working inside that dynamic, to say nothing. Then Paulette, not knowing any better, turned to Renata and said, "You must be so proud of what Sylvia's built here." And Sylvia, without pausing, without a flicker, said, "Renata is still learning the business. She handles the coordination side. The client relationships are mine." My daughter drove herself home and sat in her driveway for 20 minutes. When I called her back and heard the careful flatness in her voice, the specific kind of flat that means a person is holding something very still so it doesn't break, I didn't ask her to tell me what happened. I asked her one question. "Are you all right?" She said yes. Then she said, "Actually, no," and she told me. Now I want to tell you about a man named Gerald Fitch, because he matters to this story more than he knew at the time, and more than he ever got credit for. Gerald Fitch is a vendor. He runs a floral and decor supply operation called Desert Bloom Wholesale that has supplied Hargrove occasions for 9 years. He was at that dinner, seated at the far end of the table, because Sylvia liked to include long-term vendors at milestone celebrations. Gerald is the kind of man who has watched a lot of dinners from the far end of a lot of tables. He doesn't say much. He notices everything. On Friday morning, Gerald called Renata, not to offer sympathy, not to say he was sorry. He called to say, "I've been supplying this business for 9 years. I know who does the work. When you're ready to talk about what comes next, I'm available." That was Gerald Fitch. He didn't make a speech out of it. He just said the true thing and left the door open. When Renata told me about the call that weekend, I listened to everything she said and I told her one thing. "Renata, I need you to trust me for about 60 days. Don't do anything yet. Don't say anything yet. Just keep doing your job the way you've been doing it." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You already know something, don't you?" I said, "I know a few things. Let me make sure I know them correctly before I tell you." Here is what I knew and hadn't told her yet. Hargrove Occasions operates out of a studio and event design space in a commercial building in North Scottsdale. That building, the entire property, is owned by a real estate holding group called Saguaro Commercial Partners. I know this because Saguaro Commercial Partners is a client of Elmore Structural Group. We have done inspection and assessment work on 3 of their properties over the past 7 years. The relationship is professional, and it is current. I also knew, because I pay attention to the documents that cross my desk, that the lease on the Hargrove Occasions space was due for its 5-year renewal in June, 4 months away. I had never once considered using that knowledge for anything other than the structural work it was connected to. Until Thursday evening in March, the thought had genuinely never crossed my mind. But here is the other thing I knew, and this one I had been sitting on for longer than I'm comfortable admitting. Sylvia Hargrove had, on 2 separate occasions at family gatherings, made comments about my work. Not loud comments, the kind that are designed to reach you sideways. Once, she said to someone across the table, in a voice calibrated to carry, that structural engineering was very steady work for people who don't mind being behind the scenes their whole lives. Another time, when Derek mentioned that my firm had been brought in on a significant infrastructure project in Pima County, Sylvia looked at her wine glass and said, "It's nice when public contracts keep smaller firms afloat." I had not said a word either time. I had filed both away with the same patience I have applied to every load-bearing problem I have ever assessed. You do not respond to the surface. You find the foundation. For about 2 weeks after the dinner, I did nothing visible. I drove to Scottsdale on a Tuesday on the pretense of a client meeting, and I took the long way past the building on Pima Road, where Hargrove Occasions has its studio. I sat in my truck at the light and looked at the signage and the parking lot, and the small but visible presence Sylvia had built there over 18 years. I thought about Renata preparing proposals on weekends. I thought about Paulette being told my daughter was still learning the business. I still didn't call anyone that day. What moved me to act was not what happened at the dinner. It was what happened the Monday after I'd spoken with Renata. Sylvia sent her a calendar invite for a meeting titled Role Clarity Discussion. No other context, no prior conversation, just a calendar invite with that title, sent at 11:48 at night. I called my attorney the next morning. Her name is Diane Castillo, and she has handled the contracts and professional agreements for Elmore Structural Group for 16 years. I asked her one question. If a commercial tenant's lease comes up for renewal and the building owner simply declines to renew, what does the tenant's position look like? Diane told me it depended entirely on the lease terms and applicable state statutes, but that in the absence of a renewal option clause, a landlord declining to renew was clean and within rights, with proper notice as required. I asked her whether a third party with a professional relationship to the building owner could, appropriately, provide context or perspective to the owner in the course of that owner's decision-making. She said that was called having a conversation, and there was nothing inappropriate about it. That was all I needed. I called the principal at Saguaro Commercial Partners, a man named Richard Okafor, whom I have worked alongside on 3 properties, and I asked him to lunch. I did not tell him what I was calling about. I said I had a professional matter I wanted to think through with someone whose judgment I respected. We met at a diner near his office in Tempe. I told him plainly what the situation was. I told him that my daughter worked in one of his buildings, that she had spent 3 years building something valuable inside a business that had taken systematic credit for her work, and that I was exploring options. I told him I was not asking him to do anything improper. I told him I was asking him whether, in the normal course of reviewing his lease portfolio this coming June, there was any possibility of a different kind of conversation about that space. Richard was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Warren, I've been waiting 3 years for someone to bring me a credible operator for that unit. Sylvia Hargrove is a reliable rent payer and a difficult tenant. Tell me more about your daughter." I told him everything. I told him about the corporate account, about the proposal written over a weekend, about Paulette and what she'd been told at the dinner table. I told him about Gerald Fitch and what Gerald had said the morning after. Richard listened to all of it. Then he said, "Get me a business plan, not a concept, a real plan. If she can put that together, I have a decision to make about June that I've been putting off anyway." I didn't tell Renata that night. I called Gerald Fitch first. I want to be clear about the conversation I had with Gerald, because I know how this part can sound. I did not ask Gerald to do anything against his existing agreements or obligations. I asked him whether, hypothetically, in a world where a new event planning operation opened in the Scottsdale market, with an experienced operator at the helm and a solid vendor foundation, he would consider being part of its foundation, Gerald said, and I am going to remember this for a long time. I've been waiting 9 years to write a contract with the person who actually keeps the lights on over there. Yes. In April, I sat down with Renata, and I put everything on the table. I told her about Richard Okafor. I told her about Gerald. I told her what Diane had said about the lease. I told her what I was prepared to help her build if she was willing to build it. She was quiet for a long time in a completely different way than she'd been quiet on the phone in March. This was not the quiet of holding something still so it wouldn't break. This was the quiet of someone recalibrating, of someone letting themselves believe something they'd stopped, letting themselves believe. She said, "What about Derek?" I said, "That's between you and Derek. This is about you." She thought for another long moment and then she said, "Okay, show me what you have." What came together over the next 6 weeks was disciplined and quiet. Renata put together a business plan that I reviewed for structure, and Richard's team reviewed for commercial viability. She had 3 existing clients who told her privately they would follow her if she launched independently. Clients who had worked with her specifically, who requested her by name, who had been told by Sylvia those requests were a team effort. Gerald came on as her founding vendor partner. Diane drafted the entity formation documents. Richard Okafor gave her a lease offer for a smaller unit in a different building he owned, better located for her client profile, at a rate that was fair and not punitive. We did not tell Sylvia. We did not tell Derek until Renata was ready. She told Derek on a Sunday evening in late April, and I was not there for that conversation, nor should I have been. Derek did not take it easily. He loves his mother, and watching the architecture of that situation become visible to him in an evening was hard. But Renata told me afterward that when she finished explaining, Derek sat with it for a few minutes and then said, "I knew something wasn't right. I just didn't know how to see it yet." That, as far as I'm concerned, is all I needed to know about my son-in-law. The formal notices went out in May, not from me, from Richard Okafor's property management office. A standard non-renewal notice, properly dated, sent certified mail, exactly as the lease terms required. Nothing aggressive, nothing personal. Commercial correspondence, at its most ordinary. Sylvia did not reach out to me. She reached out to Derek, twice on a Tuesday, then again Wednesday morning, then a long email Thursday evening that Derek forwarded to me because he thought I should know its contents, and he no longer felt the need to protect his mother's version of events. In that email, Sylvia described the non-renewal as a coordinated attack. She used the phrase sabotage by family 4 times. She did not, in 3 pages, mention Renata's name in connection with the corporate account she had presented in front of Paulette. She did not mention the weekend proposal. She said that Renata had been given every opportunity to grow and had chosen instead to work against the family. I read that email twice. Then I closed my laptop and went to bed. Sylvia did eventually call me. I gave her the conversation because I have never been a man who avoids the things he's set in motion. We spoke on a Wednesday morning, and she asked me if I understood what I had done. I told her I understood it precisely. I told her I had watched her take credit for my daughter's work for 3 years, and I had watched my daughter accept it because she loved her husband and was trying to make the marriage work, and I had decided that I was no longer willing to be a passive observer of that arrangement. I told her the lease decision was Richard Okafor's, and that my conversation with Richard had been exactly what I described, professional and transparent. She told me I had destroyed her business. I told her I had not destroyed her business. I had simply stopped being indifferent to where it operated and who was helping it operate. The distinction matters. I didn't take anything from Sylvia Hargrove that she had built. I took away the invisible scaffolding she'd been standing on and pretending was a pedestal she'd constructed herself. She said, "Renata will never be able to do this without my name behind her." I told her that was Renata's to find out, and I had no doubt about what she'd find. Hargrove Occasions vacated the Pima Road studio in July. Sylvia relocated to a smaller shared workspace arrangement across town, subletting time in another designer's facility. From what I hear through the vendor community, the corporate hospitality account went with Renata when she left. Paulette had, it turned out, asked to be contacted directly if Renata ever went independent. She had made that request in February, 6 weeks before the dinner at Arcadia table. Renata opened her own firm in August. She called it Still Water Events. I thought that was exactly right. She held a small opening gathering at the new studio, just vendors and the first 3 clients, and a few people who'd believed in the project from the start. Gerald Fitch showed up with an arrangement he'd made himself. Richard Okafor stopped by for 20 minutes and shook her hand and told her the space suited her. I drove up from Tucson for it. When I walked in, Renata was talking to a client near the window, and she looked up and saw me and gave me a nod. Not a wave, not a smile, a nod. The kind that means, I see you, and I've got this, and I'm not going to fall apart in the middle of my own opening because of how much this moment means. I nodded back and went to find the coffee. I'm not going to tell you everything resolved cleanly. Derek's relationship with his mother is complicated now in ways it wasn't before, and that weight belongs to him and to Renata, and I try to stay out of the middle of it. There are Sunday calls that are short and dinners that are navigated carefully, and I'm sure there are conversations I'll never hear about that cost them both something. I carry that. I made a choice that had consequences beyond the 2 people who deserved those consequences, and I don't get to pretend otherwise. What I do know is this. 8 months ago, My daughter was sitting in her driveway at 9:30 on a Thursday night, holding a version of herself together that she'd been holding together for 3 years. And when I called, she told me it was nothing. Last week, she sent me a photograph. Her and Derek at the new studio, early morning, both of them with coffee, the light coming through the windows she'd chosen herself, the schedule board behind them covered in client names. She didn't write anything in the message. She didn't need to. I have spent 31 years understanding load and support. I know what a structure looks like when it's been carrying weight it was never designed to carry. And I know what it looks like when you remove the false load and let it stand in its actual form. What Renata built, once she was allowed to build it in her own name, was something I should have known she was capable of all along. I did know. I just waited too long to act on what I knew. I won't make that mistake again. There's a thing I come back to when I think about why it took me as long as it did. I told myself for 2 years that patience was the honorable choice, that letting Renata handle her own situation was respect. The truth is, there's a difference between patience and passivity, and I had been confusing the two. Patience is waiting for the right moment to act. Passivity is waiting for the moment to pass. I know the difference now in a way that I won't forget. If you've ever watched someone you love get smaller, year by year, inside a situation that rewards their silence, you know the weight I'm talking about. You know the particular helplessness of watching a person you raised to be full somehow learn to take up less space. The dinner in March didn't change what was happening. It just made me stop pretending I couldn't see it. I'm not a dramatic man. I didn't show up at Sylvia Hargrove's door. I didn't make threats. I didn't raise my voice in a single exchange throughout this entire sequence of events. I made 2 phone calls, attended 1 lunch, and answered 1 phone call I didn't have to answer. Everything else was paperwork and timing and the slow procedural machinery of people doing what they have the right to do. That's all revenge ever needs to be, in my experience. You don't have to destroy anyone. You just have to stop holding up the floor beneath them and let gravity do what gravity does. If this story sat with you, if it reminded you of someone you love who's been carrying something quietly for too long, hit like and leave a comment. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me if you've been in this situation, on either side of it. I'd like to hear from you. I read more of these than you'd think. I'll see you in the next one.